Great. So I just wanted to also mention that I'm going to be recording this meeting also. So if anyone, you don't need to write notes all the time if you'd like to, of course, but you can watch this at any time and feel free to ask any questions. Cool. So the agenda today. So we're going to be speaking about macronutrients, micronutrients, which I'll go into all of these, sports nutrition, key take-home points, Q&A, and finish. So we'll spend a bit of time, roughly about 30 minutes of chatting for me, and then you guys can ask me any questions that you want. There is no bad questions. Cool. So the first thing I want to explain to you guys is that when you think of the human body and when we want to talk about nutrition, we think about it, the human body is very identical to a car. So what do I mean by that? So here we've got a Ferrari versus something that doesn't even exist. So if we have a car that gets regular service, it's got high quality petrol, it's going to be a high quality car in terms of the speed, performance, braking. Versus a car like this, which is irregular service, low quality petrol, there's going to be a low quality car. It's not going to perform right, as you would imagine. So as we can see here, everyone probably knows who this guy is. And we see someone who is very overweight. So for this guy here, Mr. CR, he would have very high quality nutrition from Whole Foods, and he would have optimal health and optimal performance. If he didn't have that, he wouldn't be performing and looking like this. So we have here someone who's very overweight and obese. They're having low quality nutrition, mostly from processed foods. And what's going to happen is that they're going to have poor health and chronic diseases. So what I'm trying to get people to understand for this is that if you really think about the body, if you're going to provide it with the resources as in the form of nutrition, which we call fuel for the body, it's going to work really well. So my job with people is to make sure that their fuel in their body is coming from high quality sources versus low quality sources. So the first thing we need to understand with nutrition is a term called macronutrients. So macro is another word for large. So it's nutrients that are required in large quantities for energy and proper daily function. So if we don't have these macronutrients in adequate quantities, our bodies cannot function properly, simple as that. So there's 5 different macronutrients. The population likes to think of just carb, protein, fats, but there's actually water and fiber that are included. So I'm just going to go through each one and just sort of explain in more detail of why we need that, how much, etc. So the first is protein. So protein comes from the word primary, proteus, which means from the Greek word of primary, of holding first place. So if there's any person that I see,
I don't know what the kids are. Oh.
So can someone just mute theirs? Don't know who that is. So the first nutrient that when I think about when I'm seeing anyone with a plant is protein, because it's primary, it's very, very critical. So what are the key functions of protein? Growth and maintenance of tissues. It's really good for chemical reactions. So a lot of proteins actually produce hormones in the body. So when our hormones are not working properly, our health is impaired and also our performance is impaired. Provides structure to bones, ligaments, and joints. It maintains pH levels, maintains fluid balance. And a really cool thing about protein that is really good for our immunity, for our immune health. So if we don't have enough protein, we're more susceptible to regular colds and flus, which obviously from a footballer, we can't have that happening. So when you have high protein, the immunity is really important. The next one is called another benefit, which is transportation and storage of nutrients. What that means is that protein is required to distribute nutrients throughout the body. So where do we get our protein from? So primarily from lean meats, legumes, poultry, fish, seafood, dairy products, and eggs. So the next question I often get asked is, well, Jake, how much protein should I actually have? It's very individualized. The National Health and Medical Research Council, which is an Australian government body, says between 0.8 to 1 gram per kilo of body weight. For example, someone who weighs 60 kilos, I have 60 grams of protein. Now you need to understand with the recommendations from the government, it's just very base, so that just very minimal, but someone who's doing performance, you want to get that up. What I try to say to people is that to make sure they just have a good protein source at each meal, because that means what we call in the nutrition world, we're in a hypoaminoacidemic environment. We just need a steady stream of protein throughout the day. So the next macronutrient is the one that's probably the gold standard in sports nutrition and sports performance, is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, there's two forms of carbohydrates. There's low glycemic versus high glycemic. So low glycemic is carbohydrates that are more slowly, readily absorbed throughout the body. This is really critical for a footballer to understand, because if a footballer is just having from high glycemic sources, their energy levels throughout the game, the training, throughout the day, whatever it is not going to be elongated, not going to be balanced. I need to make sure with anyone that I see that their carbohydrates are coming from those low glycemic carbohydrates. High quality such as brown rice, whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, sweet potato and oats. What's critical for you guys to understand with carbohydrates is that it's the primary fuel source for the brain, as well as aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So when the body requires energy, it gets it from carbohydrates. Now, what's really important to understand with carbohydrates is that when we have carbohydrates, it gets converted into glucose. When the body has enough glucose, it gets stored as what's something called glycogen, which is found in the liver and the muscle tissue. What glycogen is, it's that it's stored carbohydrates. So when someone has a training session or a game, the body relies on carbohydrates as its fuel source. So if there isn't enough carbohydrate in the form of glycogen, performance is going to be very impaired. So it's really important to understand that carbohydrates is absolutely critical for sporting performance. Also, it's really important for preserving muscle tissue. So when someone's doing a lot of exercise, it's putting a lot of strain on the joint, the ligaments, the muscle, bones, and we need the carbohydrates to preserve that. It's really important for digestive health. And it's really important also for people to understand that it's really good for sleeping, because carbohydrates release a hormone called tryptophan and serotonin, which helps you sleep properly. The main thing you need to understand with carbohydrates is that we need it throughout the day, particularly for a footballer. I'll discuss sports nutrition down the line, but it's really, really important that every single meal and snack for a footballer has to include carbohydrates. The next macronutrient is one that's probably the most controversial in the nutrition world and also the population. It gets a very bad rap for very bad reasons, because fat is critical for health. We have what we need to understand for fats is that there's 4 types of fats. So we call polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, which is coming from the avocado, nuts, seeds, oily fish, versus trans and saturated fat, which are more pro-inflammatory. Okay, I'll get into that, which is coming from the sort of, the cookies, the pastries, the hamburgers, muffins sort of thing that is quite high in that. Now, if we don't have fats in our diet, we can't absorb fat-soluble vitamins, which are vitamin A, D, and K. What that means is that when these vitamins are absolutely critical for human health, for example, vitamin D is critical for bone health. Vitamin A, E, and K are also involved in metabolism, so the way that the body gets energy. So we must have fat in the diet. It's just simple as that. It's also really important for absorption of the nutrients. We just need to make sure that the majority of the food intake that we have comes from these fats, the poly and mono. What do I mean by anti-inflammatory versus pro-inflammatory? So anti-inflammatory means that when we exercise or daily life, we build up a sort of inflammation as an inflammatory response. Now, if we don't have proper anti-inflammatory foods, performance is going to be affected because the recovery is going to be affected. So we just need to make sure that dietary fat is also present. Obviously, not as much as protein and carbohydrate, but we just need to make sure that in the meal or in the snack, we have some sort of good quality fat. Now, that's not to say you never have saturated and trans your whole life. It's just that we just need to make sure that's the majority. The next macronutrient is one that's called dietary fiber. So dietary fiber only comes from plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, etc. And they're very essential to human health because it's really important for not only for regulating appetite, but particularly from digestive health. High fiber foods, oats, psyllium husk, seeds, legumes, nuts, banana, whole grain bread. These sort of foods are really important for just general health. When we don't have enough dietary fiber in our diet, we're more prone to constipation as well as cholesterol issues. And it also reduces the risk of sort of hemorrhoids, bowel cancer, that side of things. So we just need to make sure that we have enough dietary fiber in our diet coming from those plant-based foods, and our digestion is really good to go. So another macronutrient, which is one of the most important, which is just everyday life, is water. So it's actually a really cool statistic, is that the human body is approximately 60% water. So that's obviously that's a lot. So when we think of that, so that's 60% of our body weight is water. So brain and heart is 73%, lungs being 83%, skin being 64%, muscles 79%. This is what also wanted to really what caught my attention was muscles being 79% water. So what that means is that if we're not having adequate water, our muscles can't work properly because it's 79%, and also the blood and bones. So the key benefits, you can write an essay on this because there's so many benefits, but the first one I'll speak about is aerobic performance. So it's been scientifically shown over and over again that if the body is dehydrated, our aerobic performance is going to be impaired. We're more likely to get tired, more likely to get fatigued, and also more injury prone because, as we can see, the muscle's 79% water. So there's going to be more muscular injuries. And then there's other benefits: lubricating the joints, delivers oxygen throughout the body, it maintains skin health, and it protects the brain and spinal cord. So as you guys will know, if you haven't had any water during the day, you most likely experience some of these symptoms: dry mouth, being lethargic, headache. In terms of quantity of water, it's obviously going to be very individualized. So everyone that I see, depending on their age, how much physical activity levels, but what I roughly say is between 1.5 to 2.5 liters, give or take. We just need to make sure that throughout the day we have water, and particularly around sporting performance. Now, another subcategory that I want to speak about is what we call micronutrients. So these are nutrients that the body requires in smaller amounts, but it is absolutely essential that we have our micronutrients in the diet for pretty much everyday daily functioning. So micronutrients, which I'll get to, where do we get them from? It's from whole foods. Whole foods are pretty much just foods that are unprocessed and unpackaged. Fruit, nuts, vegetables, seeds, grains, lean meats. These fruits are just going to be, it's in natural states. When we have a whole foods diet, which I'll get to whole foods primarily, we're covered, our micronutrients are covered. So our energy production, our immunity, our bone health, heart health, brain health, it's covered. So we just need to make sure that a majority percent is coming from whole foods, because that means that it's covered. To give you a few examples of a micronutrient, where we think of magnesium. So magnesium is required for muscular contractions, bones, and also for when we don't have enough magnesium in our diet, for example, we're more likely to get muscle soreness, get muscular cramps, and also we're going to more likely be having sleep issues because sleep obviously is imperative for performance and health. But that's one example. Another example would be calcium. So calcium is another micronutrient. If we don't have calcium, our bone health is going to be impaired. Now, for a football, if they don't have enough calcium, again, more likely to have stress fractures. If they're in a tackle, if they're getting tackled, they're more likely to have a fracture. The next one is sort of another one, which is vitamin C. So vitamin C, as we spoke about a little bit with protein, is really important for our immunity. So we can't afford to have no vitamin C in our diet because then the footballers are going to get regular colds and flus. So micronutrients, critical. Now, we move on to the sports nutrition. So sports nutrition is a new phenomenon and it's becoming more increasingly widespread in awareness. There's obviously a reason why pretty much now every Premier League team, A-League team, La Liga team will have a nutritionist or a dietitian on their team because it is absolutely critical once we have our base diet right that our nutrition for optimizing for sport. So sports nutrition is evidence-based science of fueling on the form of food and hydrating in the form of water before, during, and after exercise. If we have accomplished sports nutrition, we have improved performance, recovery, and stamina. If we don't have appropriate sports nutrition, there's reduced performance and we're more susceptible to injuries. It's identically to understand its specific nutritional intervention at specific times of each day. There's pre-game, there's post-game, and what we call intra-game. You guys maybe have seen during halftime or during the course of a game, athletes or footballers would sip on energy gels. You see those gels, they just tear it open, sip it on. What that is that's a form of sports nutrition. They're having carbohydrates, sugar at halftime in order to replenish glycogen, replenish carbohydrate, and also for energy levels so they can last the game. That would be a very relevant example because that's very much at halftime. You would see that all throughout the game. Now, this is what I sort of, when I try speak to people about sports nutrition, we have, as you can see, we have Ronaldo here and we have a diagram. I call it aerobic fitness versus nutritional fitness. So obviously you guys with the Academy at Nick are doing all the aerobic based fitness, the conditioning, running, that side of thing. But if we don't have the nutritional fitness, which is the form of the whole foods, our aerobic fitness is not going to be optimal and not optimized. Now, some key take-home points that I really want you guys to understand. A lot of people say to me, Jake, what should I have before a game? What should I have at the end of the game? What should I have throughout the game? I'm like, you just need to take a deep breath and to understand a very well-known, what we call the sports nutrition pyramid. So the sports nutrition pyramid is highlighting very clearly what's most important to what's least important. If we go straight to dietary supplements, which is not something that you do with young people, but if we go straight to sports specific, we're missing the basic fundamentals. So there's absolutely no point in going straight to sports specific unless the diet is optimized. How do we optimize the diet? It's very simple. It's a whole foods diet. It's not a diet as in think of it on an actual diet. It's coming, you just want to make sure that the primarily of your diet, of your intake coming from whole foods. We want to make sure in each meal, we have a high quality protein, vegetables, fruit, a complex carbohydrates, and a healthy fat. Once we have whole foods, a nutrition plan that's primarily from whole foods, then we can go on to sports specific nutrition. If we're just going to the sports specific nutrition and missing the base diet, that's not advantageous, not positive at all, because I need to make sure anyone that I see, we need to ensure that the intake from whole foods, regular, really high quality foods that are going to be optimal for health and performance, and then we can go onto the sport specific nutrition. So if you guys would like to take this further, you can more than happy to give me a call or a text. We can set up a consultation for your up and coming next Socceroo or Matilda. What I do is that I do an initial consultation. So it goes for about 45 minutes. And then I'll take a very extensive outline of your child footballer's dietary intake. I'll get an understanding of their exercise, what sort of how their fatigue is, that sort of thing, energy levels. And based on that, I'll provide a nutrition plan that would be appropriate for their goals and obviously for their position as well. So if you guys are keen, you've got my details. I've sent you a text with the Zoom link and an email, and you can always reach out to me if you feel that you want your footballer to get an individualized nutrition plan. I very much made it directly. I did it intentionally to not give a meal plan on the PowerPoint or not give exact dosages of foods, because what I want everyone to understand is that what I'm trying to do is very individualized. So obviously people from different ages, their weight, height, physical activity levels, etc., are going to require different levels of food. So that's my role. I don't want to I'm never going to see someone and give them the exact plan that I would give to someone else. I would always make sure that everything is individualized. So I want you guys, so thanks so much for your time. I've spoken for about 25 minutes. I just wanted to give time for you guys to ask me any questions that you like, any queries, concerns. There's absolutely no such thing as a bad question, I promise. Anyone that wants to ask anything, please fire away. We have all the time. The Zoom allows us for 45 minutes unless we get kicked out. So we've got enough time for you guys to ask me any questions that you want. So shoot away. Who's going to be the first one? Please do not be shy. You can ask me anything you want, and I will be more than happy to answer anything at the moment. Nothing as yet? Okay. If there isn't any questions, we have one question. Someone's raised their hand. No. No.
I think this question in the chat, Jake.
Oh, the chat. We've got a chat. Okay. What's the best thing to eat before a game? Good question. How are you? Is this Ian? What's your name? You can unmute yourself. No? Okay. So I've been asked, what is the best thing to eat before a game? So it's a very good question. So what we want to do before a game is that depending on what time of the game it is, we want to make sure that there is enough carbohydrates and enough protein, because we need the carbohydrates for energy and we need the protein for the muscle recovery. So it's normally what happens now is that there is, for example, there's a 3 p.m. kickoff. So if it's a 3 p.m. kickoff, you would have your normal breakfast, which would just be a high quality. For example, if you want to do a breakfast of oats with milk, fruit, a little bit of honey, that would be your normal breakfast. You would have a lunch. So if you're having a lunch and your game is at 3 p.m., we want to be having a high quality and a high amount of carbohydrates and protein. So that's a really good, probably gold standard is a pasta. If you have a pasta with a little bit of chicken and a little bit of vegetables, the pasta coming primarily from, if you want to do wholemeal pasta is going to be very easily digested, very easily absorbed, and not going to make you feel extremely full. And if you have a little bit of, a good quality chicken or some legumes, you're going to get some protein as well with that. So a pasta is probably something that is quite, when I've gone to see sport teams and what they say, when they give their pre-match meal, they normally do a pasta-based meal. So I hope you guys like pasta, because it's a staple. Or you can do a like a brown rice, substituting the pasta for brown rice. Does that make sense? You have any other questions? What I'll go on to, if you're asking what's to eat before a game, the next question you want to ask is, what should you have after a game? So after a game, it's more about the same thing, getting the protein, carbohydrates in there. A lot of athletes, what they do after the game is have sandwiches, because sandwiches are really portable. It's quite easily digestible. It has the good amount of quality protein, carbohydrates, or they can have protein bars, they have energy drinks. But the main thing you just want to make sure is that you have high quality protein and carbohydrates after the game within 30 minutes. We got another question. I'm liking this. You got the ball rolling. I'm very impressed. So would you suggest taking magnesium for muscle recovery in addition to a well-balanced diet? Great question. I really like that question. So magnesium for muscle recovery, yes, that's a really good start point. We need magnesium for, obviously, as I mentioned throughout the presentation, to reduce muscle cramps, muscle soreness. Now, should we take it in addition to a well-balanced diet? That's a little bit, it's a good question. If we're having our RDI of magnesium, 600 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams a day, we need to understand that the word supplement has got a bit skewed. So I try to say to people, supplement is a word called supplement, which means supplementing already the diet. So if we have a high magnesium rich diet, there isn't an actual reason, unless there is an underlying micronutrient deficiency of magnesium, to take additional magnesium. What players do, they can do, is have magnesium after the game, because supplements are meant to be a way of getting nutrients, vitamins and minerals very easily digestible, so that otherwise they don't have time for it. But they can do additional, I'll just take that back. I'm going a bit round, but this is a good question. So in the sense, if when you're exercising, your body's magnesiums go up. So if the RDI is 800 milligrams, if you're exercising, it's going to be more. So what you can do is two options. You can either have a magnesium powder, as you mentioned, about an actual supplement, or you could just have more magnesium rich foods, like banana, for example, oats, seeds. So there's those two options. Does that clarify that? I don't know who asked that, but you can ask any other more questions in the chat. All right, next one. My child isn't a fan of breakfast. What would you recommend as quick and easy but nutrition option? What age of protein shakes recommended, and is the shake an acceptable option? Another great question, Julie. All right, let's do the first question. So what would you suggest if your child isn't a fan of breakfast? So we know that breakfast is actually a really cool thing, because breakfast actually, when you break the word down, is breaking the fast. So the body's been fasting overnight. So when we wake up in the morning, there's been, depending on how much you sleep or how much football you've watched, like me, and don't have enough sleep, but you should get, for example, if someone's had 8 or 9 hours of sleep, they haven't had any nutrition for 8-9 hours. So I try to say to people, a lot of people say to me, I don't really get hungry at breakfast, but I'm kind of like, well, what do you want to do? Because you've been fasting overnight. It's like absolutely so important. But to start with, if someone hasn't got an appetite during breakfast, but I just want to get some sort of nutrition in them, no, I wouldn't recommend a protein shake for breakfast for someone who's a teenager. I want to introduce protein powders sort of further along the line because it's supplements. I don't like to give protein powders out for anyone 18 and under. It's not that they're dangerous. I just primarily want it to come from whole foods. Quick nutritious option, easy on the go that I give that is gold is smoothies. Smoothies are absolutely gold because they're extremely healthy. They're coming from fruits, vegetables, milk-based products, really good. And what's really cool about smoothies is that when you do a juice, for example, and you're blending the juice, you're taking all the fiber out of the juice. So it means that the vitamins, it's not as healthy, not as nutrient dense. So a really good thing would be smoothies on the go. That would be really quick, easy to go. And then obviously, depending on how much time you have, then the cereal base come in, the egg-based options come in, that sort of thing. But to answer the age of the protein shakes, for me, I wouldn't like my teenager to be consuming protein shakes. I would much rather them to come in from high protein sources. All right, cool. Next one. Should you have a power nap before your game? That's a very interesting question. So a power nap is primarily what happens an athlete will do if they have a night game or an afternoon game is that they would have their breakfast, they would go for a morning walk just to get lactic acid, just to get the legs moving. And sometimes they would nap before the game. That is true. I've spoken to a few footballers actually and a few dietitians, and actually a reason sometimes why they nap is that there's nothing to do all day because they're just stuck in their hotel room. So if they've slept well throughout the night, there isn't scientific evidence to show that they should nap before the game. But if you're tired and you haven't had enough sleep, but primarily is that it's not going to be sort of like make or break if you don't have a power nap, but there's nothing wrong with power naps. It's just that it's not that it's going to be critical for improving performance. If you have sleep throughout the night, you'll be good to go. Now, the next one, chips and young players. Kids love their hot chips after a game. How suitable is it after a game snack? Okay, cool. So chips is something that, we got 1 minute. All you guys if anyone wants to stay, all you're gonna do is you're gonna click on the same link. The same link, I'll go online after it breaks out. If you go on the same link, you'll be able to ask all the questions and the time will continue. So you just click on the same link. But chips and young players. Okay, yes, kids love their hot chips. I used to. I'm now 29 and I definitely loved mine when I was a child. Now, how suitable is it for kids after a game snack? Now, we need to think when I talk about nutrition, I also want to talk about context. So we can't be having 100% whole foods the rest of our life, and we can't be not enjoying ourselves. So are chips incredibly healthy? No. Are they something that you should have every single day, all day? No. Is it bad to have once a week, once a fortnight? Absolutely not, because it's not going to be making or breaking. So hope that answers that question. It's not optimal to have chips after a game. Obviously, we want to have high quality protein, carbohydrates, but it would be much better to get a high quality versus the chips. All right, guys, I'm just going to shut this and I'll go into the Zoom link, and then you guys can just click on the same Zoom link and I'll be on there to answer all of these questions.